Chat is disabled. Maybe I need to. And we are live. All right. Welcome to Community Office Hours. Today we have two fantastic folks from the Vault team. They are here to talk about specifically plugin development and the Vault UI. These are mystery things. I don't think we've ever talked about them at all. I don't think we've ever asked questions about it either. So for those who are on the stream today with us, we'd love to hear your questions. All right, so starting with Angel and then Calvin, would you introduce yourselves and explain a little bit of what you do on the Vault team?
Sure thing. So my name's Angel Garbarino, and I'm on the Vault UI team. And we're a small team, but it's an effective team, and we work on the UI. So everything that you see in Vault UI is what we work on. And I've been with HashiCorp about a year coming up in December. So
awesome. Calvin?
Hi. Yeah, my name's Calvin. I am the tech lead for the Vault ecosystem team. I joined the ecosystem team about 3 months ago. And before that, I was in the Vault core team. I've been with HashiCorp for about 3.5 years now.
Excellent. So when we refer to ecosystem, is there a specific part of the ecosystem where it's just like you have to be a Swiss Army knife for everything?
It's basically that. Yeah, you have to be a Swiss Army knife for everything, because we work with a lot of different technology platforms, a lot of different providers. So yeah, use a wide breadth of different things.
Awesome. Well then, I think we could hop into some demo. And we're going to start with Angel today. It is we don't talk about this very much. We don't actually talk about our UIs at all really at HashiCorp. But it's interesting because they're all of the same stack for the most part, right, Angel? And
sure.
we keep the standards where we try to keep it pretty uniform across our tools.
Yep. All right, so I'm going to share my screen.
Okay.
And you can see my Zoom there, but can you see this?
Let me just double check to make sure the size is just big enough. You might have to zoom in like 3 or 4 times.
If I make this wider, is that better at all?
I think it's the font. If you can zoom in somehow.
I'm on a wide screen, so that could be it.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So remind me to do that if I don't do it for the other screens. So I'm going to give a demo of the UI and just kind of like a demo of things that you wouldn't know about reading the Learn doc. So things that aren't included in there, things that are like more specific about like the development experience of the UI. But before I start, I want to show you like how do you even get to the UI information, like how do you get to the README, how do you like set up your development environment for UI. So if you go to GitHub HashiCorp Vault, and then you go down into the UI here, you can see this nice README we have here. It talks all about kind of like our stack, how to run tests, how to set up the development environment, even Vault Storybook, which is how we share components among developers, not so much as a design aspect, but for engineering, we have Vault Storybook. And as Rosemary mentioned, we are an Ember stack. So all the product UIs use Ember for their front-end framework. And the history, I was interested in this because I was curious, like, why do we use Ember? Well, I think it's like 2015, we had a product called Atlas, and that was the first product UI that we built out. Atlas isn't around anymore, but that was the first product UI we built out. And the people that were working on Atlas were familiar with Rails, and Rails and Ember are very similar to one another. So that's why we decided to use Ember. And then from there, all the product UIs now use Ember, and they've always used Ember. But like the website, so like the Learn docs or the website marketing docs, those type of things, those are all on React, but all the product UIs are Ember.
Oh, I didn't know that actually.
Yeah,
that's really interesting.
Yeah, so it's been super helpful to have all the products using the same framework, largely because like we are small teams, but when you combine all the product UI front-end teams together, you have this like now larger knowledge base of people who are familiar with Ember. I can go and ask another team like, hey, have you experienced or used this add-on before? What's your experience? Do you recommend another one? Those kind of things. And we actually do like bi-monthly like teaching sessions where a developer will teach something on Ember. So they learn and everyone else learns at the same time. So it's super nice to have everyone using the same stack. Okay, so this is kind of like how you would set up the development environment if you wanted to poke around in the UI. I also want to point out the Ember guides if you are at all curious about Ember, how this is kind of like your first stop of where you would go. But it's important to note that the guides are organized by version. So you can see here, this is like the versions that you would select, and then the information would change based off that. And not all the product UIs at HashiCorp are on the same version of Ember, which is an important distinction because around like 3.15, Ember 3.15, they changed to what's called Octane, so Ember Octane. And there's some like structural differences in there that would change how you would write like computed properties versus tracked properties or something like that. So if you're curious and want to know like what version of Ember you're on, it's not as easy just to go into the package.json file and look for a variety of reasons. But the cheat way to do this is to go in here into your developer tools and type Ember version, and that will return the version. So you can do that on any Ember application. So you can see Vault's on version 3.8. We do plan to upgrade to Octane soon, but just haven't gotten there yet. But we're on 3.8, and I know like other console, those type of things are going to be on different versions. So it's helpful.
Interesting. Is there like a performance improvement if you do upgrade to it, or it's mostly about either what you mentioned before, which is how it's being computed, or the logic itself that's different?
I think there probably is, not right off the bat as far as like a performance enhancement. You'd have to like change structurally your code base in order to take advantage of some of those enhancements. It's more about kind of like a change in the Ember community about how they want to handle like computed properties. So there's just some like foundational changes that are happening in Ember that happen between Ember and Ember Octane. But, yeah.
Pause for a second. I know that there is a problem with chat right now. I apologize to those who are watching. If you have questions, please feel free to drop a note to me on Twitter, and I am going to monitor it so that I can ask questions. So if you have questions for Angel or Calvin, please drop it. Oh, it is fixed. Okay. Hold on 1 second. Let me double check, make sure it's fixed so I can actually see oh, there we are. It has been fixed. Thank you to our lovely moderator who has fixed it for us. If you have questions as we go along, please post them in the chat and I'll ask Calvin or Angel about it. So sorry for the pause. I just wanted to make sure that we got the chat working.
Oh, that's good. No questions. Okay, before I get into the demo, one last thing I want to show you is I mentioned Atlas came around 2015. Well, the first version of the Vault UI came around 2016. And this is what it looked like. And it used to be enterprise only feature, so you could only see it if you had enterprise. And I'm like a history person. I like to know why things are the way they are or their history. So I dug these up from another engineer. Thank you for these slides. But this is like what it looked like, which is very different. If you're at all familiar with the Vault UI now, it looks very different. But you can see here, like, yeah, these just aren't very similar at all to what we have. And again, this was the UI used to be only an enterprise, and then in April 2018, I think we turned it into an OSS feature. So we moved those assets to OSS.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So it's kind of cool to see this.
Wow.
All right. So to the demo. So I'm going to show replication, kind of like a workflow in replication. But before I do that, I want to show a couple of things that, like, if you're at all curious and poking around the UI code base, some helpful things to understand. So that's kind of going to be this like overview demo. So the first thing is that like all the data that we're displaying is based off an API. And so if you're at all curious about like what's going on, you can just look in the network tab, which I'm sure you're familiar with if you've done any development, and check out the endpoints that we're hitting here. So like here we have a 404 because there's no secrets that are being returned. But you can see the endpoint we hit, and then you can go to the API documentation and check out like what parameters we should be sending or receiving if you're curious. So I'll just go ahead and create a secret here. Nothing special.
Calvin, did you know this trick about the UI? I just found this out. Now I'm going to borrow this.
Yeah, super helpful. Like I can tell by a lot of tickets that a lot of questions would be solved if people poked around in the network tab. But then you can see now, like, obviously this got returned. I have some data that is returned, and that's the secret that's been listed.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that I think is interesting, okay, so we have these like health, seal status, and status endpoints that are getting hit all the time. You can see it's like constantly generating. These get hit, I believe, even if you're unauthenticated. So like if you're not even logged into Vault, these are going to get hit. And these, you can poke around in them. These have to do with like your cluster, your seal status, that kind of stuff that you don't have to have if you're not logged in. So those are automatically happening all the time. Okay, one more thing about the network tab is that in certain areas of the UI, we take advantage of OpenAPI. And we do this primarily in the auth methods area. And if you're familiar with OpenAPI, I'm going to do a bad job at summarizing it, but essentially we get like a glob of data back, and then we use that to dynamically generate forms, which is largely what this UI is made of. It's a lot of forms. And so in the auth method, if you're curious like where we're using OpenAPI, if you click on let's choose LDAP here, and if I click next, and the moment I click enable method, I'm going to be looking for endpoint that was hit that had help at the end of it. So there it is. And that, if you see help there, that means we're hitting the open API, and then you can see the open API information come through. So that's what generated this form that I'm seeing right here. So we don't do that everywhere in the UI. We do it in a lot of places, but not everywhere. But I thought that that was worth pointing out. Another thing is if you are ever going to develop an Ember, you need to have this extension. The Ember extension is super helpful. It helps you understand where in the app you need to look for things. So if you're curious like where I would find the information for this specific page, these are all routes indicated by gray, which is in a different section of an Ember application. And these are all components, which are located in a different section. You can click on these and it will show you information about like the attributes that are on those components, things like that. Super helpful to kind of navigate around. Another big part of this is Ember Data, which is an add-on, but comes with all Ember CLI applications. And this is essentially the state of our application. So it's like, what information is the app keeping track of or have received from the API? You can see this in the data, and these are the different models. So for example, under auth method, you can see the two auth methods that I have right there. So just kind of a trick there. That's kind of it, I think, for the developer tools. The other thing I can show you is under policies. If you're like me, I have a difficult time remembering the paths to how to write policies. I always come in here to the default and check this out. I know you can see this on the CLI too, but it's easier to read here. So this is like my cheat sheet. If I'm ever curious how to write a policy, I go in here. And then one last trick is that when you first launch the UI, it comes with this wizard, or kind of like guide, I should say. And if you're like me and you first launched it and you're like, I want to explore and not be told how to explore, you shut this and then you forget that it exists at all. So this is how you get it back, restart the guide. And then if you're curious how to start like a certain secrets engine or something, you can poke around and it will walk you through.
Oh, neat.
Yeah, super helpful. Okay, so last part of this demo, I'm going to walk through a workflow on replication, which is an enterprise-only feature, but it's kind of, we revamped it in 1.5 as far as the UI is concerned, like how we display it. And we made it more of like a holistic approach where you, like the moment that you land on the dashboard, you can kind of see everything that's relevant to you. So it's easier to understand what's going on with your clusters. And the workflow that I'm going to walk through is I'm going to make a DR primary on this cluster, which is at port 4202. And then this is going to be my secondary at 4200. And DR stands for disaster recovery. And I'm not going to pretend to describe replication in a very succinct manner because it's complex, other than to say that disaster recovery is essentially a backup. So if this was my primary and this was my secondary, it would be my backup of my primary. There's a lot more that goes into it than that, but all right, so let's make this our primary disaster recovery. So this is the replication area. You would see this if you have enterprise. And my cluster mode is primary. So I'm going to enable replication here. And then I land on this dashboard, and this is like the new screen that we kind of created. And visually right off the bat, you can see everything you need to as far as what's relevant for the cluster's health or how it's communicating.
Angel, could you bump up the font even more?
Oh, yes.
I think some people are having some issues seeing it.
Sorry,
There
my
No problem. Good thing for style sheeting.
Yes. Okay, so we have this details page. It's got all the information you'd want to see when you land. The manage page is like all the actions you could take with this cluster for replication. And then the secondaries is like if you had a bunch of secondaries, a list of them. We also show secondaries here under known secondaries. This is just a view to see all of them if you have quite a few. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a secondary, and I'm just going to give it some name here. Generate a token. I click copy close. It's going to add this token to my clipboard. And now in order to connect, so now we have this like secondary, but it's disconnected. It's not connected to anything. So connect this. I'm going to go over to this other cluster. Enable. Let me get rid of this so you can see. Now make this a secondary as the cluster mode. And paste that activation token. I'm going to enable, and then why this is happening, oh, I already did. This will say connected once it hits that status endpoint again. When those run automatically, we'll update this. So that's how this gets updated. So there you go. So now it's connected and it has the URL that's associated with it. And if I go back to the DR secondary, you can see that this looks quite different. There's no longer the secrets or access or policy. Because this is your DR secondary, you're not going to do anything with it. All you're really going to see is like these actions that you can take because it's a DR secondary. And then also this details page, which again is helpful information regarding like its connection and its state. We have some like hover overs to help you. Okay, so again, I have, this is my primary, this is my secondary, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to promote this secondary to my primary, which means you would do this like if your primary failed. This is like the whole purpose of disaster recovery. If your primary failed, you want to promote this, and now this becomes your primary. The first thing that you do is you generate a token, and I've already copied this code in here. And you get this operation token command, and this isn't something you perform in the UI, you actually perform in the CLI, but we create the command for you. And then I'll go quickly over to my terminal here, paste this in, it returns what I need. And then I can close this. I'm going to promote now, and I give that my DR operation token. Again, this like all makes more sense if you read the docs what all these specific things mean, but promote it, and now this becomes my primary. So that's kind of the full walkthrough.
That's interesting. So when you're designing this, and I noticed that that's, as you're building this, and I noticed that you were going, you were showing secrets or you're showing sensitive data, right? So is that something that you consider as you're building some of these views? Like, do you ever store the secrets in the, in some portion of, I guess, the developer tools if you're debugging, et cetera? Like, is that a consideration?
Well, for like if we ever store, like the moment that we create a secret, we just hit the API and post that data to the API. So it's not stored so much on the front end. Mm-hmm. And as far as like, I know that there's like when people are typing in information, they want it masked or they want it to be a password field. So it's not shown at all as they're typing. Yeah. So we do have certain areas of the application where we like account for that. But as far as like storing anything on the front end, we don't store anything. We just post it to the API and that's the end of it for us.
Cool. And is the API, are you using like a client, like a JavaScript client that connects to Vault? Is that a library, or are you did you kind of have to write that as part of the UI itself, those API calls?
Ember has a really like kind of a structured way of how to make network requests. Mm-hmm. And so we're using Ajax, and it's through the system of adapters. So it's kind of already set up for you, but essentially they're just Ajax requests that we're making.
Okay, cool. See, all of these new things. I am not a front-end developer, by the way, so I have very, very limited knowledge. I am learning new things every time. Very cool. If anybody has questions specifically about the UI, or if you even have comments about things that you want to see in the UI, even how you're using it, please post it in chat. We'd love to hear how you're using it, what you're using it for. There's some neat features in the UI. We just don't know if people are using them or not. So definitely please post if you have any comments or feedback on that. We did get a question. However, it is not about the UI. So I'm going to generally, broadly pose it to the group. I don't know if we'll be able to answer it, but CSU DSU Industries asked, any insight in certificate signing SSH keys?
Okay, so I think I don't know if like this is the right answer, but I believe that you can use the PKI backend to sign certificates and then use those for your SSH sessions.
Awesome. Okay, PKI backend. I'm going to post the link. I know there was a link that I posted as well, just for additional clarification. But if you're interested in learning more, there's the PKI backend, PKI secrets engine there. So I'll post the link into chat. All right. So let's see if as we go, if anybody has questions for either Calvin or Angel, I'll pose them, as in a good spot, so to speak. But just for the sake of like the second bit of it, Calvin, I hear you have something to do with plugin development on Vault.
Yeah, so today I'll be talking about plugin development. I think that is something that needs to get more exposure because we always want to encourage people to extend the ecosystem, write their own plugins, and use Vault the way that they want to, even if we don't support a particular workflow. So plugins is a way to do that. So in Vault, there are a couple of things that are pluggable, namely the secrets engines and auth methods. Those can be plugins, or in fact, those are all plugins, except for maybe the token store, which is sort of built into Vault. But technically, every backend is a pluggable backend. So anything that you see that is built in Vault, you can actually build a binary version of it, register to Vault, and run it as an external plugin. There's also the database plugin, which is sort of a subset of a secrets engine, which is the database secrets engine. It combines a bunch of the all of the database plugins that you register into a single engine, so that you can use that database engine as a common interface to interact with your database implementation of the plugin. But today we're not going to touch on those because those are a little bit less common. So we'll be going over just secret engines and auth methods as plugins. So I'm just going to share my screen. I think this is fine. Okay, can y'all see it? Thumbs up? Yes, okay, cool. Yeah, so we'll be going over.
You may want to bump up the font on the terminals, just because.
Yeah, okay, sure.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see. Can I bump this up? Okay. Should be that command. Not sure why it wasn't working. There we go. Okay. So we'll be going over the Learn Guide for building the plugins, and we'll be using a Vault Guides repo in here that has a couple of mock plugins that we'll be going over. So the first thing that we want to do is actually head over to the repository here and look at one of the plugins. We'll start with the secrets engine, the mock one. So I'm already in this directory in this case. We'll take a look at what's in there. So there are two main things that you have to pay attention to when developing your own plugin. The first one, which I think is a more important one, is your actual implementation of the plugin. Let me also bump this up. It's your actual implementation of the plugin.
A couple more, I think.
And a couple more?
Yeah, a couple more.
Okay, to ship this in then. Okay, and then this is the implementation of the plugin that you have to do. I'll go over this very quickly in a second. And then the second thing is a very thin wrapper that basically we will end up compiling. And this is what Vault will end up executing when you register the binary against Vault. This will basically, it's a Go plugin, which is a library developed by HashiCorp, and it basically allows Vault to communicate over gRPC securely with this particular binary that we're going to be building. And a lot of this is boilerplate. The only thing that differs from plugin to plugin is basically this backend factory function, which needs to call the factory function that we'll be implementing in our file in here in backend.go. And so the factory function, basically what it does is call a constructor function that instantiates a new backend object, which in this case, it's a very simple thing that wraps the framework.backend, which is a struct in our SDK. And then you also add anything additional that you need in this struct. So in this case, the mock plugin in here is a very simple KV store. We're going to be storing things, by key, just some data. So it calls new backend, which instantiates a new object of backend. And what it needs to do is also call setup, which does some setup of the backend before it's ready to use. And so the bulk of the work is actually structuring your API and structuring the paths for your backend. In here, in framework.backend, there are a couple fields that we need to sort of fill in. Help, for example, is what gets returned on the CLI when you type path help for your particular backend. We also need to declare the backend type. In this case, we say that it's of type logical, which is in essence a secrets engine, if we say that. The other type is type credentials, which means that this backend is a auth method. And then the last thing that we do in here is specify the set of paths that we want to expose. So if we look under paths in here, it returns a slice of framework.path. And in here, it contains just one entry for our case. And it's, once again, filling in the blanks. The pattern is basically the thing that we're matching as part of the URL right after your mount point. That is the thing that we want. This is basically the API endpoint that we're exposing. And in here, we specify a variable that we want to sort of consume. And then further down below, under fields, this is where we specify all of the parameters that this particular endpoint accepts. So in this case, we're only accepting one parameter, and that is from the actual path itself. So from the URL, or from the, if you're doing it from the CLI, the path that you provide. And this is the variable that we're looking for, and is of a type string. And then after that, we specify the set of operations that we want to do for this endpoint. So we support the CRUD operations. I'm not going to go over each and every one of those. We'll just take a look at one and see what's trying to do. Let's take a look at the write, or storing a particular secret for this plugin. In here, we make sure that the client token is not empty. Technically, Vault takes care of this, so you don't have to worry about it. But we just sanity check in here. Same with request of data. And then here, this is where we extract that the path, which is the parameter that we're looking for, from the request. That is part of the request of data. That is a value that is stored in there. So we extract that as a string, and then we use that to as part of the key for the KV store. And the data is essentially anything else within this request data. So that is how you craft essentially a endpoint, a handler for a particular endpoint.
So out of curiosity, okay. I noticed you have like the create, read, update, and delete, but your handlers are limited to write, read, and delete. Is that typical for a number of the secrets engines? Like you would want to make sure that you would want to write your write handler in a way that would be able to handle both a create and an update?
Yeah, so this is a pattern that is very common throughout, and it depends. If you want the create operation to operate entirely different from the update operation, then you can have separate handlers. We just end up sharing the same handler, because a lot of times it ends up doing the same thing. We just save a bit of code in there, and then if there are some distinctions within the handler that you want to do, then you can basically say if the request, I believe it's like if request dot the operation is a create operation, then you can do X, and if it's not, then you can do Y. So you can differentiate once you're inside the handler. You look basically at the request and see what type of operation it is, and then you can act on that as well. So yeah, you can have two separate distinct handlers that do different things, or you can have a shared handler that do things most same with some special casing.
Got it. Interesting.
Yeah. So let's say that we're done with writing our. Whoops, did I change something? Okay. Let's say that we're done with writing our plugin, and now we want to run it in Vault. So what we do is we basically need to compile a version of this plugin. There's a handy script within this mock repository that does it for us, but it's basically just doing a go build against the main.go file that we have under this directory, and then popping it in under Vault plugins, which is the directory that we create within the same repo. It's just gonna get it nowhere, so that should be fine. And then once we have to build the plugin binary, what we can do is start a dev instance of Vault. And you see that we'll have this plugin automatically registered for the server. Usually, if you're running a prod server, it doesn't do this for you. You have to manually register it to the plugin catalog for security purposes. For example, you want to make sure that the Shazam's signatures match against the version, the binary that you're using, so that people don't maliciously start running plugins. So for this particular instance, we have that all set up, and so now we can go back to the guide and we'll see what are the next steps. Let's see.
What's really interesting to me as you're walking through this is that it's very, like the SDK approach is very similar to how you would develop a Terraform provider. And that's really fascinating, right? When you're doing this in Terraform, maybe there are some differences in that you have to structure the schema of the resource that you're trying to write for. But it's a little bit like almost equivalent to like the API path that you were showing as part of the Vault secrets engine. You want to decide the path. You also want to decide what information you pass to the path. And then in terms of even like building the plugin and then testing it, I noticed it's also very similar. You build it and then you test it against dev. And it's very similar in Terraform, where you build the plugin and you can test it and load it locally as part of like your provider cache or something. So it's very interesting. It's a very similar workflow.
So what we're going to do next is to try to actually enable the secrets engine, this custom plugin that we've just built into this dev server. And so this should work fine. Yep, looks like it went through. And when we list our set of enabled secrets engine, we'll be able to see that mock secrets is mounted. And it's of type the Vault plugin secrets mock, which is our custom plugin. So we'll test it out. We'll do an operation on the handler that we just went over, which is the write. And it wrote data. And if we read it back, it should give us what we wrote back. And so pretty cool.
Neat.
Yep.
One thing that I would be curious about, and I think it's something as part of the example shows a key value store, right? But if you were doing this against an API, this could be Google, this could be something else. How would you configure your client to connect to that API, right? Because this key value store is local within Vault. And if you're trying to do API tokens, for example, you would need to make sure your secrets engine could connect to it. So where would that go?
Yeah, so for that case, you would do something like expose a config endpoint that then accepts the parameters to connect to the provider. So for instance, for AWS, you accept a set of credentials, the endpoint that you like, the region that you want to connect to, and all of the other informations. And then once that is parsed in by config, that handler can actually instantiate a client that is specific to AWS using their SDK, and then store that on the backend, so that anytime your backend needs to communicate against that third party, it can use that cached client to talk and do API calls with it. And then based on the response that you get back, you further parse it or do things with it. Yeah.
And
so
we have
basically exposing.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Got it. No, we have actually a question about developing the external secrets engine from Daniel. Is it possible to use leases with an external secrets engine? And if the lease expires, can you have a callback? A use case would be invalidating an API token, for example.
Yeah, so yes, you can. So let's take a look at, oops. Yeah, so secrets backend can generate leases for sure. So if we look at, for instance, AWS, we can see that there are the part about the callback, I don't think so. We don't have the ability to do to perform a callback upon expiry, but secret engines essentially can generate leases. They generate dynamic credentials, which can have leases tied to them, so that Vault can take care of automatically expiring those credentials once the TTL is up, for instance.
Yes. So basically, after the lease expires, the token would effectively be invalidated, and the callback mechanism would be to Vault itself, not necessarily the secret.
Exactly.
Engine. Okay.
Right. Yeah. The callback in this case is purely internal, and that is against the expiration manager, which is a subsystem within Vault that does the handling of expiring leases, which can be tied to either tokens or a set of dynamic credentials that a secrets backend generates. Yep.
Cool. And Angel, I know this is kind of like an offbeat question, but if someone is developing a custom secrets engine or auth backend or plugin, does that show up in the UI?
I don't believe so.
Cool. Okay. Would it be possible for someone to do that?
In the UI, I don't think we have it set up. You may actually see some sort of like it show up in the list, but then when you go to it, I can't even say for certain, but I haven't played with that. So
cool. I'm learning all sorts of things. Maybe someone can fork the UI and then add their custom plugin. All right. Sorry for pausing the demo, Calvin.
Yeah, no problem. So I'll come back to the leases part. I want to find a reference and point to that, but I do want to have enough time to go over the auth example as well, because that is for the most part the same, but there are subtle differences when you're comparing it to the secrets engine. So let's take a look at that. So you see that in here, the layout is very, very similar. And for the most part, like I said, it's the same. And so if you look at main.go, for instance, same thing, no change. In here, we're just calling the factory function from here instead. And so if we look at the structure and the layout of backend, once again, we embed the framework.backend into our custom backend struct. And then in here, instead of using a KV, we're still using a map, but instead of storing arbitrary data, we're storing in essence what are usernames and passwords. And then we'll use that to basically authenticate and return back a vault token. So once you have a vault token, you can use that to basically do operations against vault based on the token's policies and permissions within that policy, within those policies, I mean. So the backend function looks very, very similar. Actually, looks pretty much the same. The difference in here for the new backend starts to show up. As I said before, now we're declaring that this backend is of type credential, which essentially makes Vault treated as a auth method. We have something called a auth renew callback or handler, and we'll look into that in a bit. This basically allows Vault to renew the token or know how to verify that the metadata within that token is correct and that Vault can renew that. We also have something new in here called path special. And path special has a couple of things under there, but the thing that we're interested in is the unauthenticated set of paths that we want to provide. In this case, we want to provide a login path so that people can start logging in without having a Vault token to start with, because that's how they'll get one. So they have to have an endpoint, or we have to have an endpoint for them to reach to us to essentially exchange their credits for a Vault token. And then we also expose the path login in here under paths. And then the rest is pretty much the same. Path user is just a set of fraud operations against users, so that we can manipulate the set of users within this backend. And user lists all the available users. So let's go over handle login and see how the login logic works. So if we look at path login, we'll see that the fields that it accepts are the username, and the password. And in here, we try to retrieve that from our request data. And then once that's provided, we store it in our users in-memory map. What we do is next is, well, this is, yeah. Or we retrieve the user password from our map, since this is a login and not a user, right? And then we compare the password that is passed in during the login with the password that we have. And once that's okayed, we craft a logical response. And within that response, we have the auth object in here. And this is essentially what Vault is going to consume to when it generates the token to basically store the set of things that it needs to store, including things like the TTL values, maxTTL, the set of policies that are attached to that token. This is how you specify it. So in here, we're specifying a set of internal data. In this case, it's just a password. This is used on the renewal to verify that things are matching up. We're hard coding a set of policies in here, but you could as well during user creation, set that, allow that to be set by the API call, by the create user operation, and store that along with the user entry, and put it in here during login. Same with TTL, maxTTL values. We're hard coding those, but it could be configurable if you expose those on your API operations for user creation. And so we return this response back once everything is good to go. And then the other thing that we need to look at is the auth renew handler. And this gets called by Vault whenever we do a Vault token renew against a token that is issued by this backend. Vault will know where to route the renewal request, and it'll hit this auth renew handler. So what we do is, based on that request, we extract the user and we extract the password from both the metadata. This field is publicly, returned back as part of responses. So this is not secret, and this bit is turned back. we're going to use the password stored in the internal data to verify against the password that we have in the backend. And if they match up, then we basically do a renewal by resetting the TTL and max TTL values. So let's go ahead and try to compile this plugin. Should be relatively quick. And then we'll do make start again to start up a dev instance. We see that our mock auth method is already registered. The next step is to actually go ahead and enable, oops, I keep doing that, is to actually enable the auth method in here. So let's go over to the second section in here. And we'll once again log in as root. We enable the auth method. And we'll list to make sure that things are still good. We have the auth method in here. And here's where we create our user. So we basically register a user called John with password. We'll just do the listen here to verify that it's all good. In there. And we use that user to basically exchange our credits for a vault token. And so we see that we have the token in here. So if you do all the token lookup, you can see the remaining TTL, for instance, the policies that are in here, the metadata, which is what we popped in when we did the login. And so the other thing that we can do is to renew in here. Look at the renewal. So once I hit vault token renew on this token, it refreshed the token duration back to 30 seconds, and everything remained the same. And so that's it.
Cool.
The plugin development is for both secret and auth, secret engines and auth methods are relatively straightforward. There's not a lot that you have to do to get you going. It's basically embedding a struct that we have in here against your custom backend struct, and then filling in the blanks, filling in the API paths that you want to expose and how you want to handle the operations for each of those paths and the parameters that it accepts. Yep.
Awesome. Thanks, Calvin. That was, I have more questions, but I'm going to let the chat post some questions since I think we've reached the free form part since we have 10 minutes left. We have a question from Jason. Does the Vault UI also work, the Vault UI team also work on the Vault CLI?
We do not. We do have, we're in communication with them quite often, especially like when we're building a new product and we're talking about like potentially things that the UI might want to be able to show. So we'll go back and forth a little bit about like, can you guys add this consideration to the API, or like, what's your consideration for making this command, so that we can match up with that. But we don't work, more than communication, we don't work directly with them.
What's interesting and part of, I guess what's also, I imagine, a little bit challenging both on the UI side, but also as part of the secrets engine and auth method design, is that you can choose what API path you want in secrets engines, auth methods, or even, you know, and I imagine that they're not all uniform across all secrets engines or auth methods. So how is that challenging from a UI standpoint when you're representing them, you know, in the UI, right? Because GitHub is, as an auth method, is different from some of the other ones, even secrets engines. They have different API paths. And even when you're doing plugin development, how does the choice of API path affect, you know, both perspectives?
I know from like the front end perspective, routing is a big thing in Ember. So you'll see paths and routes, like your URLs match up entirely. So I can say, like, if you name a secret engine a certain secret, like a name, give it a different path, that's all going to match. And so Ember is kind of perfect for that because its router is really controlling the structure of your application. So it matches perfectly with the path kind of syntax.
Calvin, how is this challenging from a plugin development standpoint? Like I tried to do my own plugin, and I was sitting there trying to figure out what was the best API path to make. What are some tips or ideas that you have when you're developing a plugin?
Yeah, so it's having the flexibility to basically come up with your own API path is sort of like a double-edged sword, right? You can do a lot with it, but at the same time, it can be overwhelming, and you might not necessarily know what are the set of best practices. So my go-to is to actually look at existing plugins and see how they've been done, and see what are the patterns that they follow, and I'll try to sort of adapt those as well whenever they're applicable. So that is sort of my go-to when it comes to plugin development. And as you write more and more plugins, you sort of get the feel of it and be comfortable in around the API design and around how to set up your or lay out your API paths. Yeah, but at the very beginning, it can be a little bit overwhelming.
Is there a go-to one that you reference in terms of like the best auth backend to look at, or the best secrets engine to like reverse engineer and to make sure you're, developing with best practices in mind?
That is a tricky question. That's a tricky one to answer. Because it really depends on like what you're trying to do with your backend. I'd say that if it's the first time that you're doing a backend and you haven't done it before, my suggestion to go over the Vault Learn guide and go over the Vault guides and look at the mock plugins. So essentially the set of files that I've just shown in here, right, in the demo. But go over those, line by line, and try to see like what it's trying to do. And then from there, you can sort of add things onto it. But that'd be a great way to start. As for a particular repo, I don't look at any particular one, because there are bits and pieces that I might need from one, and that does not exist on the other one. So I'll look at a couple of repos and try to see like what is the set of commonalities between all of these plugins, and sort of figure out the patterns. So one example is the use of roles, like the roles API endpoint. It is something that is very common throughout many plugins, and that is not enforced by Vault necessarily, right? It's just a pattern that we end up using a lot to basically group up a set of common parameters that we can then reuse. And have that be called roles. So that is one thing, for instance, to look for if you're trying to do something like that.
Cool, interesting. We have a question from Daniel. For secrets engines, the binary is only running when the path is invoked, right? For example, it's not designed to be a long-running service and constantly watching for updates. So like from a technical standpoint, how does a secrets engine plugin, run?
Yeah, so I believe that it is a long-running binary. It should be pretty lean though, so it should not consume a lot of resource. And in fact, the library that we use to compile the binaries and set up the comps between Vault and the plugin it's a OSS library that is developed by HashiCorp. So if you are interested in looking in deeper into like how that works, go to HashiCorp, the HashiCorp org under GitHub, and search for Go dash plugins, and that is the repository that we use. If I remember correctly, the plugins are long running executes, so they won't terminate once your API call ends. But having said that, the reload on the initial loading on a plugin is sort of like a lazy loading mechanism, so it doesn't really get invoked until the first time that it's called. If that.
Learn something new every day. I didn't realize it was lazy loaded. All right, so this is a question for Angel. When will Vault UI have a dark theme?
A great question. I do not know, but I will pass that along to design. I think that's a great option. And I'd love to see that too. So thanks for bringing that.
Do you happen to know if Waypoint and Boundary, their UIs are developed in Ember as well?
Yes, I believe they're SAS, correct? No, I can't remember. Yeah. Yes, I believe so, but don't quote me. They should be.
Okay, interesting. Because I remember that was funny at HashiConf. They're like dark mode. I was like, oh, all right. So everybody's gonna wait for Vault UI dark mode then. Sounds good. All right. Well, we have 3 minutes left. If anybody has additional commentary or questions, please feel free to drop in on another Vault community office hours, or tweet at us. I'm happy to field some of the questions to either Calvin or Angel on UI, plugin development, or anything else. I believe we have a couple other office hours ahead. There's, I believe, one this week as well from Tales from Decrypt. It's a Halloween themed one. And we have a Nomad 1.0 office hours tomorrow. The launch day was today, but we also have the office hours, so you can AMA or ask anybody anything on that office hours. Calvin and Angel, any last thoughts that you have? Any recommendations on resources or things that people can continue to use to learn more about the UI or plugin development?
For the UI specifically, I think we love feedback because we're binaries. It's hard to know how people are using the UI. So if you have requests or you have things that you like, whatever, just let us know. All of that is very helpful for us.
I guess from me, one thing that I want to bring up is the plugin portal. So the plugin portal is a recently new page that we added to the Vault website. And so if you end up making and developing your own plugin, feel free to submit a request to us to have that added to the portal. We have a community section specifically for that. Right now, it's not on its fullest capacity. So any contributions on that end is always welcomed.
I guess that leaves one question then. Will there be a Vault plugin registry like the Terraform registry?
I can't say anything for sure at this point in time, but that is definitely something that we've talked about and with it. It's just it requires further discussions around that. There are several things that we need to also consider, but that is a great question. No additional information at this end, but at this point in time. But yeah, that's all I can say.
Awesome. Well, put it this way: if you have features like that you want to know about, or you want to hear about, or you want to see, always reach out to us. We're happy to hear them and bring them back and see what happens. I would be excited if there was a registry, although I know there's some complexities in terms of making sure they're verified and signing them and everything else. But I think that would be really cool. If you need any other links, please let us know. We'll put them in the chat. Otherwise, we have a couple of links that Calvin mentioned for the Learn Guide on the plugins, Angel's recommendations on where to find information about the Vault UI. We also have some additional URLs, etc. And I think actually we do have one last question, and I do want to pose this, but just wanted to make a point about writing unit tests for Vault and Go. It generally breaks test code panic if we have too many calls made to the test Vault cluster. Any good resources about writing tests?
Is this on the actual like Go code, like writing tests against Vault?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so there are essentially two ways to go about it. One is to basically spin up Docker containers using libraries that do that, and then tear them down once you're done. And then the other one is to use, I think there's a a function called test cluster in either the SDK or in Vault itself in the package. And that is actually what we use a lot of the times to spin up a cluster sort of in memory and test against Vault.
Cool.
So I think it's called, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that last minute tip. Unfortunately, I think we're going to go offline. So Saurabh, if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us about testing. Maybe that's another Vault office hours. And Angela, Calvin, thank you so much for being here today and for answering all of our questions very patiently. We appreciate your time. And for those of you who are tuning in, we appreciate you joining us. And we will see you at the next office hours.